A family can look complete and still be missing its center. The absence that hurts most is not when someone leaves, but when someone stays and stops seeing you. On Sundays, the Carter house looked like a magazine's idea of peace. Light fell through the kitchen window in polite gold squares. The countertops were clear, the sink obediently empty, the fruit bowl rehearsed with apples that would be cut and never eaten. If you snapped a picture, you could convince yourself a happy family lived here. Emma Carter knew better than pictures. She woke before the alarm because her body had learned the hours of this house like a second language. 6:20 a.m., the radiator's soft tick. 6:25, the neighbor's sprinklers. 6:30, the quiet call to rise, no trumpet, just duty. She slid from bed carefully, a practiced pirouette that kept the mattress from rippling under Ryan's shoulder. He slept on his right side, mouth slightly open, one hand under the pillow, as if his dreams had told him to hide something valuable there. In the kitchen, Emma reached for the French press and the tin of beans she rationed like a currency of calm. Ryan liked his coffee 2 notches shy of bitter. She had learned that not from a request, but from the way his jaw tightened on mornings she made it strong. She measured, ground, and poured with a monk's attention. 4 minutes, stir twice, pour slowly. In another life, she might have written music. In this one, she composed routine. While the water sang, she wiped the table where they sat each morning and told themselves they were fine. She caught the faint crescent of a coffee ring left from yesterday, Ryan's, always at 12 o'clock to the placemat, always careless in the same way. She scrubbed, then polished with the flat of her palm until the wood reflected her face back to her in an impressionist blur. 36, she thought, young enough to start again, old enough to be tired. In the pantry, the cereal boxes stood like obedient soldiers. Ryan reached for granola on weekdays and blueberry oatmeal on Sundays. He liked the story of it, a special breakfast for a special day. The truth was oatmeal kept him full until noon, which meant fewer interruptions when the code was flowing. He said the word flowing the way some men said fishing, reverent and a little secret, as if the stream chose you. Emma set his favorite bowl, the chipped navy one he'd carried from apartment to apartment like a talisman, in its exact place. Spoon to the right, handle at 4 o'clock, paper folded beside it in a clean rectangle with the sports section on top. Ryan never read the front page first. He said bad news ruined good weather. She cracked the window an inch and the Seattle air wandered in, damp and earnest. The city was a drum far away, buses' exhales, a raven's caw, a bicycle chain chucking over a hill. She liked these sounds. They had nothing to do with her. Upstairs, she sorted laundry, the domestic arithmetic she could do in her sleep. Whites, colors, delicates. Ryan's shirts in a neat, forgiving pile, the light blue button-downs that said I am reliable, the charcoal polo shirts that said I work from home but I'm important, the single checked shirt he wore when he wanted to remember college. She buttoned every third button before folding. It kept the placket straight. She had discovered this trick in their second year of marriage. She had never told anyone. Some victories are private. On Ryan's side of the closet, his hangers faced left. On hers, they faced right. She had read once that strong marriages were built on micro-compromises. She had never been asked which way she preferred. There were 6 clean towels. She rolled them tight as bakery loaves and stacked them by the sink. Ryan liked the blue striped towels. She took white. She didn't remember choosing white, only defaulting to it, a color that gets dingy while pretending to be pure. At 7:52, she padded back downstairs in socks, the ones with pale gray soles, and poured the coffee into 2 mugs. Ryan's had a constellation of coffee stains along the rim, little brown charts of the mornings he'd lived through. Hers was clean, almost new, the mug that never told on her. He came down at 8:07, as he always did, drawn by the smell the way a commuter is drawn by timetable. Morning, he said. A yawn cracked into the word and kissed the air near her cheek. If you had filmed them and turned off the sound, you might have mistaken the gesture for tenderness. Morning, she answered. Her voice made room for his day. He reached for the mug that was not quite hot enough and not quite cold enough. Perfect, he said, and took a slow, grateful sip, the compliment floating above the coffee like steam. He set his laptop on the table. He hadn't meant to, not on a Sunday, but there it was, opening itself like a habit. We pushed a big release Friday, he said, spooning oatmeal into his bowl with theatrical care. May need to jump on if the logs spike. Emma slid the milk toward him. Big release, she echoed. That's good. It is, he said, already in the blessed, buzzing world that lived under his fingers. We finally refactored the messaging queue. Remember that bug I told you about, the one with the phantom timeouts? She nodded. She remembered not the bug, but the way he had described it, leaning in, eyes lit from the inside. It was a language she did not speak, but she loved that he spoke something with passion. She had once hoped naively that passion was a transferable skill. Anyway, he said, scraping the bowl's edges, how's the art show at your school? Still doing that thing with the what is it, popsicle sticks? He smiled, proud of his approximation. Watercolor self-portraits this month, she said. We'll frame them with popsicle sticks, though. Cute. He was already scanning the box scores. Parents love that stuff. They do, she said. He looked up not unkindly. You okay? You're quiet. I'm good, she said, and was good at this, at fitting the room's shape. Her students sometimes asked how colors made feelings. She could have told them, you learn the palette of a person, then paint yourself to match. At 9:30, she loaded the dishwasher. His bowl, her empty mug, the spoon with the oats that clung like a small, faithful animal. She wiped the counters, rinsed the sink, extracted a single coffee ground from the drain with her fingernail. Some mornings, she imagined an invisible audience applauding her clean lines. Most mornings, she imagined no audience at all. Ryan took a work call from the couch, voice low and serious, as if even the living room should respect high availability. Yeah, I see the spike, he said. We can roll back if needed, but it's probably a cloud hiccup. He listened. No, I can hop on for a sec. It won't take long. His eyes flicked to her, apologetic, the way a boy glances at his mother before asking to stay out past curfew. Go ahead, Emma mouthed. She smiled, the small, professional smile of a flight attendant in mild turbulence. In the bedroom, she smoothed the duvet until it lay like a lake under wind. On Ryan's nightstand, two books he wasn't reading, a smartwatch, a coaster with a ring that never matched his cups. On hers, a novel dog-eared at chapter 3, hand cream with a near-perfect cap, a small stone one of her students had given her, purple, polished, shaped like a heart by water that never intended it. She opened the dresser and refolded t-shirts that didn't need it. It wasn't compulsion, it was correction, the house's quiet grammar. If I do this, she thought, if I keep doing this, the sentence we are writing will hold. Downstairs, Ryan laughed into his headset, a warm, boyish sound. It floated up the staircase like a balloon she wasn't invited to hold. At noon, they ate sandwiches, turkey, lettuce, mustard arranged with a geometric logic. He liked triangles. She cut her rectangle in half. We should book something for June, he said through a bite. Maybe a cabin. I've been dying to do a digital detox. We could, she said. She would pack chargers anyway because plans are ideas until they're weather. Chloe posted pictures from Taos, he added, scrolling. Remember Chloe from college? She's doing these, what are they, silent retreats, looks intense. He grinned. I'd last an hour. Emma rinsed her plate. Probably two, she said and smiled. He didn't hear the joke. He was already reading comments, thumbs stuttering like sparrows. Afternoon drifted in with a patient gray, the kind Seattle wears like a favorite sweater. Emma vacuumed. She watered the plant that forgave missed weekends. She sorted the mail, stacked the bills, put the coupons into the drawer they called the drawer because naming it would mean admitting what it did, swallow good intentions whole. At 3, Ryan closed the laptop and scrubbed his hands down his face, satisfied. Crisis averted, he said. How about we watch something? Sure, she said, though Sunday shows left her sad in a way she couldn't explain, as if the plots borrowed her own quiet sorrow for props. They settled on a documentary about a climber who chased impossible mountains and the woman who loved him enough to let him. Wild, Ryan whispered, eyes wide. Man to live like that. He meant the mountains. She watched the woman's hands, steady, scarred, resetting ropes, cooking soup, translating fear into the language of care. By 5, the light thinned. The day folded itself along the usual creases and slid into evening. Emma chopped onions for chili, the air filling with the clean ache of them. You're crying, Ryan said playfully, walking past behind her. Just onions, she said. He kissed the top of her head, quick and absent, and disappeared to change for a run that he would not take. He'd return in a t-shirt one shade darker than the one he left in and say, "Got caught up reading." She could see the hour ahead with the clarity of a forecast. Dinner at 6:15, dishes by 6:40, him on the couch by 7:00, a game on mute and his phone on loud. She would grade 2 spelling tests with neat red checks and write great effort on the margins of a boy's paper who never believed her. At the sink, steam rose and fogged the window above it. She wiped a circle clear with the side of her wrist and looked out across their block. A boy on a scooter dragged one foot along the curb like a rudder. A dog snuffled a hydrangea with a seriousness that made her laugh. Across the street, Mrs. Klein set a pie on her sill to cool, just like last week and the week before. The ordinary world kept being ordinary, indifferent to both longing and relief. Somewhere in the distance, a siren rose and fell. The sound cut the evening in two like a zipper catching. Emma stood very still, one hand on a dish towel, one on the counter's edge, and felt something move, not outside, but inside, a small current changing its mind. It wasn't sorrow. It wasn't hope. It was awareness. A lighthouse beam sweeping over a coastline that had always been there. Behind her, Ryan called from the stairs, "Hey, Em, do we have any of that lime stuff I like for the chili?" "In the fridge door," she answered, without looking away from the window. She watched the street for another heartbeat, maybe two, until the steam gathered again and erased the world. When she wiped the glass a second time, her own reflection looked back, soft around the edges, yes, but solid. She held her own gaze longer than felt polite, as if greeting a neighbor she hadn't seen in years. The house hummed. The clock ticked. A pot simmered. A man called down for a condiment. And Emma Carter, hands damp with clean water, stared into a thin oval of sky and knew, without thunder, without epiphany, that something somewhere had already begun to change. On Thursday evening, the Carters attended dinner at Leela and James Harper's home, a tidy colonial near the lake with soft jazz humming through invisible speakers and a smell of rosemary drifting from the oven. Leela had been Emma's closest friend since college, the kind of friend who could read a silence better than most people could read a book. From the moment they arrived, Emma felt a small tension rise between her shoulder blades. Ryan was already talking before he'd even removed his coat. He and James worked in similar fields, and code talk had a gravitational pull. Frameworks, latency, some miracle of efficiency only they seemed to understand. The women exchanged an eye roll of gentle amusement and poured wine. "Emma's students just had their spring art show," Leela said, nudging her gently. "It was beautiful. You should have seen the portraits. The kids adore her." Ryan, halfway through a story about a debugging triumph, gave a distracted smile. "Yeah, she's amazing with kids, the patience of a saint." His tone was affectionate but dismissive, the kind reserved for someone's charming hobby. "Anyway, James, you'd love this. Our product manager tried to hotfix a migration live." Leela tilted her head. "You never told me that. How did the show go?" Emma hesitated, her fingers tracing condensation on her glass. "It went well. The kids were proud. Parents came, even a reporter from the local paper showed up. Man, that's brutal," Ryan said, laughing toward James. He ended up rolling back the entire cluster, whole system down for 3 hours. The conversation flowed past her like a river she couldn't enter. She smiled politely, folded her story small, and set it down beside her plate. Later, as they cleared dishes, Leela leaned close and murmured, "Does he always do that?" "Do what?" Emma asked, though she knew. "Talk right through you like you're an intermission." Emma opened her mouth, closed it again. "He's just enthusiastic." Leela's eyes softened. "You used to be enthusiastic, too." That night in the car, rain began to fall, Seattle's quiet applause. Ryan hummed along to the radio, drumming the steering wheel. "That was fun. James cracks me up. You and Leela good?" "We're fine," she said. "You were quiet." "I didn't have much room to talk." He glanced at her. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Come on, Em." His voice sharpened slightly, as though she'd touched a bruise. "You know how it is. I get excited about work. You want me to stop talking about what I'm passionate about?" "No," she said softly. "I just want you to notice when I am." He turned back to the road, wipers thudded. Neither spoke again until the car pulled into their driveway, the garage door rising with its mechanical sigh. Sunday came again. The morning smelled of pancakes and wet bark. Emma flipped one, perfectly round, onto Ryan's plate. He scrolled through his phone while eating, laughing quietly. "What's funny?" she asked. "Oh, just an old friend from college. Remember Chloe Reed?" Emma hesitated, searching memory. "The blonde one who played guitar?" "Yeah, she's doing these retreats now, like mindfulness stuff. Went hiking in Taos, looks incredible." He angled the phone toward her. A woman in sunglasses smiled at the edge of a canyon, all confidence and sunlight. "She looks happy," Emma said. "Yeah, she said she finally feels like herself again, after her divorce." Ryan's voice carried something wistful. "You ever feel like we get too comfortable, like we stop growing?" She set down the spatula. "We're stable, Ryan. Isn't that what people work for? Maybe stability's overrated." He grinned to soften it, but she heard truth behind the teeth. She cleaned in silence while he showered, each clink of dishes a tiny percussion of thought. That afternoon, they went to the Harpers again for a barbecue. The men stood by the grill, the women arranged salad. From the patio, Emma heard Ryan bragging. "Em's amazing. She does everything, keeps the house running, pays bills on time, cooks like a pro. I don't know how she does it." It should have sounded like praise, but there was a tone of amusement, a gentle pat on the head, the same tone he used for the dog when it caught a frisbee. Inside, Leela leaned against the counter, watching her. "He's lucky," she said quietly, "but you don't look like someone who feels lucky." Emma smiled. "Marriage isn't a lottery, it's maintenance." "Yeah," Leela said, "but who's maintaining you?" The word stuck. That night, Emma sat in the living room grading papers. Ryan scrolled through Reddit, laughter sudden and loud. "Listen to this, someone made an AI that writes poems about coffee spills." She smiled thinly. "Impressive. You sound tired." "I am," she said. "From what? You had the weekend off." The pen froze midair. She looked at him, really looked. "I don't think I've had a weekend off in years, Ryan." He blinked, confused. "You don't work Sundays." "That's not what I mean." But he'd already turned back to his screen, scrolling through an endless feed of someone else's thoughts. Later, when he fell asleep, she lingered downstairs, the house wrapped in blue TV light. She walked room to room, the polished surfaces, the framed wedding photo where her smile looked genuine from a distance, the refrigerator covered with schedules and reminders, all evidence of a life managed, not lived. She touched the edge of the photo frame. In it, Ryan's hand rested on hers possessively, as if claiming the future. Upstairs, his soft snore filled the dark. She turned off the TV and stood by the window, rain streaking glass like tears from somewhere higher. The city shimmered with a quiet she recognized too well, beautiful, distant, unreachable. Something fragile inside her shifted. A crack she could almost hear. Not yet a break, but the promise of one. It happened on an ordinary Sunday, which made it worse somehow. The morning was still damp from a night of rain, the air outside glistening with that pale, silver light Seattle specialized in. Emma was folding laundry, the rhythm of her week, when Ryan came into the bedroom holding his phone as if it contained a confession. He stood by the door for a long moment, shifting his weight. The silence between them pulsed with something unspoken. "Emma," he said finally, and his tone made her pause mid-fold. "We need to talk." Her stomach tightened, though she didn't know why. He wasn't angry, his voice was almost calm. "What's wrong?" Ryan exhaled, the breath of someone rehearsing. "I think I need to take a trip." "A trip? Yeah, just a short one, maybe 2 weeks." He smiled, but it wasn't the smile that reached his eyes. Clear my head, figure things out." She placed a folded towel onto the bed, aligning its edges. "Figure what out?" "Life," he said like it was obvious. "Work's been crazy, and I've been thinking maybe I've lost touch with who I am." He waited for her to nod to fill in the gaps. Emma did nod, but not out of understanding, out of instinct. "I was thinking of going to Colorado," he continued. "There's this retreat in the Rockies, kind of a finding yourself thing, meditation, hiking, all that." She felt something cold bloom under her ribs. "Colorado," she repeated. "That's where Chloe lives now, isn't it?" His eyes flicked away. "Yeah, actually, she's the one who told me about it. She went last year, said it changed her life." For a second, Emma heard only the sound of her heartbeat, dull and slow. "So you're going with her?" Ryan scratched the back of his neck the way he did when trying to make a lie sound reasonable. Not with her exactly, just at the same retreat. She knows the place. Thought she could show me around. The towel slipped from Emma's hands onto the floor. She stared at him, searching for a trace of the man she'd married, his nervous grin, the boyish charm that once softened everything. It wasn't there. Only a calm self-justification, the expression of someone who had already forgiven himself. And you decided this when? A couple of weeks ago, he said. I wasn't sure how to bring it up. You weren't sure how to tell your wife you're going on a 2-week self-discovery trip with your ex-girlfriend? Her voice was steady, almost detached. He flinched slightly. Emma, don't make it sound like that. It's not about her, it's about me. I've been feeling lost, I just need space to think. She bent down, picked up the towel, refolded it. Her movements were careful, surgical. Space, she said quietly. You already have a whole life's worth of it. Please don't be upset, he said, coming closer. I know this sounds weird, but I think it'll be good for us. I'll come back refreshed, clear-headed. Better. Better, she echoed, her hands now smoothing a wrinkle that didn't exist. He waited, watching her face for the explosion that didn't come. When she looked up, her expression was serene, almost kind. That's nice, she said softly. I hope you find what you're looking for. Ryan blinked, uncertain. You mean that? Of course. Wow, he exhaled, relieved. I knew you'd understand, you always do. He leaned in and kissed her forehead, the same automatic gesture he gave before leaving for work. You're amazing, Em. She watched him walk away, still talking about flight schedules and weather in the Rockies. The sound of his voice receded down the hall until the house returned to silence. Emma stood there for a long time, her fingers resting on the folded stack of clothes. In the quiet, the truth settled like dust. He had been gone long before he ever packed a bag. That night, she couldn't sleep. Ryan snored softly beside her, one hand splayed across the blanket, a man at peace with his decision. She lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, watching its slow, hypnotic spin. In the dark, she thought about all the years she had built around him, every choice calibrated to his comfort. The color of their walls, the meals on Sundays, the vacations chosen for Wi-Fi coverage, not beauty. Her life had become a service quietly rendered, a routine mistaken for love. And now he wanted to find himself. She turned onto her side, studying the outline of his face. In sleep, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. She remembered the boy who once stayed up all night helping her paint the classroom for her first teaching job, laughing as they dripped blue across the floor. That version of him had loved her with wonder. This man loved her with convenience. By morning, he was gone to the gym, a new habit he'd picked up since Chloe's photos had started filling his feed. His toothbrush was missing from the holder. She stood in the doorway and looked at the empty space it left behind, small but glaring. She made coffee anyway out of habit, then poured it down the sink. At school, her students greeted her with papier-mâché hands and bright smiles. "Morning, Mrs. Carter." They sang, their voices a chorus of uncomplicated affection. She smiled back. "Good morning, artists." During lunch, Leela called. "You sound off," she said. "What's going on?" Emma hesitated. "He's going to Colorado," she said finally. "For work, for self-discovery with Chloe Reed." There was silence on the other end. "He what?" "He says it's about finding himself." Leela snorted. "Men don't find themselves, Em. They trip over good women and mistake them for compasses." Emma laughed, a short, startled sound that broke something open inside her. "What are you going to do?" Leela asked. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe nothing." "Nothing?" Emma looked out the window at her class on the playground. The kids were running in circles, shrieking with joy, utterly unaware of what adults called heartbreak. "Sometimes silence says more than shouting," she said quietly. When she got home, Ryan was on the couch surrounded by shopping bags, new hiking gear, boots, a sleek jacket he'd never wear outside of a mirror. He looked up, eyes bright. "Check it out," he said. "Moisture-wicking fabric, supposed to be life-changing." "I'm sure it is," she said, setting her purse down. "You're really okay with this, right?" he asked, almost eager. "Why wouldn't I be?" He smiled, relieved again. "You're incredible, you always get me." "Yes," she said softly, "I suppose I do." He went back to packing. She watched him, the deliberate way he folded shirts, the self-satisfied hum under his breath. Something about it felt final, though he didn't know it yet. After dinner, she sat alone in the living room. The sound of running water came from upstairs, Ryan showering, maybe practicing his goodbye speech to the mirror. She opened her laptop and typed apartments for rent Seattle Capitol Hill. A list appeared, tiny bright spaces with big windows and no shared closets. Her finger hovered over one ad. Sunlit Studio month-to-month lease? She clicked save. Upstairs, the shower stopped. A new life, faint and unnamed, stirred inside her like the first heartbeat of something waiting to be born. When Ryan came down wrapped in a towel, asking where his favorite cologne was, Emma looked up and said, "Top drawer left side." Her voice was calm, her hands steady. Inside, she was already packing. The morning Ryan left for work felt strangely suspended, as if time had lost its footing. Emma stood at the kitchen counter with her coffee, watching the cream spiral through the dark liquid, pale ribbons twisting before dissolving. It was beautiful in a quiet, pointless way, like so many things in her marriage. Ryan breezed through the kitchen in his usual hurry, his phone already glued to his hand. "Don't forget I'm meeting James for drinks after work," he said, half smiling as he slung his laptop bag over his shoulder. "I'll grab takeout on my way home." Emma nodded. "Sounds good." He kissed her forehead absently, the way a man checks off a box, then left. The door clicked shut, followed by the soft, mechanical sigh of the garage. Silence expanded through the house. She stood there for several seconds, her hand resting on the counter, feeling the space he'd just vacated. Then, without ceremony, she set her mug down and opened the hall closet. The packing began slowly, hesitant, almost reverent. She started with her grandmother's china, wrapped each plate in old newspapers, and placed them in a box labeled Fragile Kitchen. The word fragile felt too on the nose, but it fit. Next came her books, her favorite mugs, the framed art her students had gifted over the years. Every item she lifted felt like a small declaration: "This is mine." By noon, there were 7 boxes stacked neatly by the front door. She didn't cry. Instead, she moved through each room like an archaeologist excavating a forgotten civilization. The relics told their own story: her money, her effort, her taste. The espresso machine she'd bought from her first teacher's bonus. The rug she'd chosen after Ryan dismissed her original pick as too girly. The painting she'd hung above the sofa, a woman standing on a pier, wind tearing through her dress. Ryan had called it melancholy. She'd called it freedom. As she wrapped the frame in a blanket, her phone buzzed. It was Leela. "Leela, are you doing what I think you're doing?" "Emma, maybe." "Leela, do you want help?" "Emma, not yet. I need to know I can do it alone." "Leela, call me when you need the getaway car." Emma smiled at the screen, a small flicker of warmth against the chill of the day. That evening, when Ryan came home, he was flushed with energy. "Guess what?" he said, dropping his bag onto the couch. "Chloe's already booked the retreat. There's this hiking trail right outside our cabins, crazy views." She said it's transformative. Emma felt the word sink into the air like a drop of oil in water. Transformative. "That's nice," she said, stacking dishes into the dishwasher. He stood behind her, excitement radiating like static. "I know this sounds weird, but I feel like this trip is going to change everything. For me, for us." She turned, forcing a smile. "I'm sure it will." "I mean it," he insisted. "You've been amazing holding things together. I think once I clear my head, I'll be a better husband." She nodded as if she believed him. "Better," she repeated softly. Later that night, when he'd fallen asleep, she sat in the dark living room. A faint drizzle tapped the windows, rhythmic and patient. The house was filled with the ghostly hum of the refrigerator, the soft breathing of a life she no longer recognized. On the coffee table sat Ryan's wallet, carelessly left open. Inside was a folded receipt from an outdoor store, $280 for hiking gear, signed R. Carter. She traced her finger along the ink and wondered when he had stopped signing Ryan. She took out her notebook, the one she used for lesson plans, and began a new list. To do before Friday. Call the landlord about the apartment. Move valuables to storage. Cancel joint credit card. Redirect mail. Leave key under mat. She paused before the last line, then added, 6. Breathe. By Thursday, she had perfected her act. She still made his coffee, still folded his shirt, still listened when he talked about his trip itinerary as though he were planning a corporate expedition. "Katie, Chloe says the altitude's rough," he told her one morning. "I should start hydrating now." "Smart," she said, hiding her smirk behind her mug. She watched him study himself in the mirror, adjusting his hair with a frown. The vanity was new. So were the whitening strips, the vitamin supplements, the cologne that claimed to smell like cedar and ambition. That evening, Leela dropped by with pizza and wine under the pretense of a girls' night. Ryan was still home, packing, and barely noticed them. As soon as he disappeared upstairs, Leela whispered, "You really doing this?" Emma nodded. "Tomorrow, as soon as he leaves for the airport." Leela grinned, equal parts pride and disbelief. "You need boxes? I've got boxes." They ate in the kitchen, the wine softening the edges of their laughter. When Ryan came down, he found them chatting about nothing in particular. "You two look suspicious," he said jokingly. "Always," Leela replied, winking. After he went to bed, Leela squeezed Emma's hand. "You're sure you don't want me here when it happens?" "I'm sure," Emma said. "It needs to be quiet. Then call me after. I'll bring champagne." Friday morning arrived with a clarity that startled her. Ryan was awake at 5, whistling as he checked his gear. His joy was almost touching in its blindness. He kissed her cheek before leaving, smelling of fresh cologne and self-importance. "Wish me luck," she smiled. "Good luck finding yourself." He grinned, oblivious. "You're the best, Em." When the Uber pulled away, she stood at the window until the taillights vanished. The house fell silent again, but this time it didn't feel empty, it felt ready. Within minutes, she moved. The boxes she'd prepared slid easily into her car. The paintings, the books, the plants all found their places like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting too long. The neighbors peeked out, curious, but no one asked questions. "Mrs. Jensen from across the street waved once slowly, as if she knew and approved. By noon, everything worth keeping was packed. The rest, the oversized TV, the recliner he loved, the shelves filled with things that didn't matter, she left behind. Before leaving, she wrote a note. She took her time with it, choosing each word carefully, as if carving something into stone. "Ryan, you wanted space to find yourself. I wanted peace to remember who I am. I hope we both find what we're looking for. Emma." She folded it once and slipped it between his socks where he'd find it too late to argue. Then she placed her house key under the mat, locked the door behind her, and walked toward her car. The sky was overcast but kind. As she turned the ignition, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face was calm, her eyes unflinching. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for him to come home. She was simply leaving, and the sound of it was freedom. The house was silent when Emma woke the next morning. A cool, pale light poured through the curtains, spreading across the bed like a quiet benediction. For a fleeting moment, she forgot what day it was. Then her eyes landed on the half-empty closet, Ryan's side stripped bare, his absence folded neatly between hangers. He was gone. Outside, the sky had that muted Seattle gray that made everything look like a photograph left out in the rain. Emma stood in the doorway, her suitcase waiting beside her like an obedient dog. The house hummed faintly, the refrigerator whirring in the background, the clock ticking as if to remind her she was still here for now. Her phone buzzed on the counter. "Ryan, boarding soon. Can't wait to clear my head. Love you, Em." She typed back, "Safe travels. Take care of yourself." Then she set the phone face down and turned it off. For a long time, she just stood in the center of the kitchen, listening to the stillness. Every sound felt amplified: the creak of the floorboard, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the whisper of the wind against the windows. It was the kind of silence that could either crush you or set you free. Emma chose freedom. By 9 a.m., a silver sedan pulled into the driveway. Leela stepped out, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a thermos of coffee. "Operation Liberation is a go," she said, grinning. Emma smiled despite herself. "You're ridiculous." "Ridiculously supportive," Leela corrected. "Now come on, let's get your life out of this mausoleum." Together, they moved through the house with purpose. Leela labeled boxes as they carried them out. Kitchen stuff that matters, things that are actually yours, memories you paid for. The levity of her sarcasm was a bomb. Around 11, Tom, Leela's husband, arrived with his truck. "He really left for this find yourself thing?" he asked, shaking his head. "Man, some people find themselves unemployed when they pull that stunt." "Let's hope he finds both," Emma said dryly. They laughed and it felt good, foreign but real. As they worked, neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. Mrs. Jensen shuffled over with a plate of blueberry muffins. I saw his fancy luggage yesterday, she said knowingly. Men always pack too much confidence and not enough sense. Emma laughed. You're not wrong. Well, Mrs. Jensen said, patting her arm, if you need a place to rest, I've got tea and stories about my ex-husband that'll make you feel like a genius for leaving. By early afternoon, the house was nearly empty. The echo of footsteps in the bare rooms gave everything a dreamlike quality. Emma walked from room to room, touching walls that had once held their laughter, their arguments, their ordinary days. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and goodbye. In the living room, the only things left were Ryan's, his recliner, his television, his neglected guitar in the corner. A museum of complacency. Keep or toss? Leela asked, holding up a framed wedding photo. Emma studied it. She and Ryan were smiling at the camera, faces still flushed from dancing, oblivious to the years ahead. Keep, she said, but in storage. It's not who I am anymore, but it's part of how I got here. Fair enough. When the last box was loaded, Leela popped open a bottle of cheap champagne from the truck. To Emma Carter, she declared, raising her cup. The woman who finally remembered she had wings. Emma lifted hers, the bubbles sharp and cold against her tongue. For the first time in years, the taste of something new. They drove in a small convoy, Tom's truck in front, Emma's car following, Leela behind like a cheerful shadow. The highway opened ahead, flanked by evergreen trees bending slightly under the wind. As the city faded in the rearview mirror, Emma felt the weight of her old life fall away, layer by layer. The house, the routines, the muted arguments, it all shrank into something distant and unimportant. Halfway across the bridge into Capitol Hill, Leela's car honked twice. Emma glanced in the mirror to see her friend flashing a peace sign through the window. She laughed out loud, an unguarded, startled sound that filled the car. The apartment waited for her in a quiet brick building draped with ivy. The landlord, an older man named Frank, greeted her with a knowing nod. You're the teacher, he said, the one looking for light. Something like that, Emma replied. He led her upstairs to a third-floor unit. The door creaked as it opened to reveal a sunlit studio with wide windows and polished wood floors. The air smelled faintly of paint and promise. It's small, Frank said. It's perfect, Emma answered. By evening, everything she owned fit into that single room. Leela and Tom helped set up her bed, stacked books along the windowsill, plugged in a small lamp that cast a soft golden glow. When they left, the apartment was quiet again, but this silence was different. It didn't ache, it breathed. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, sipping wine from a paper cup. Outside, the city glimmered, alive and indifferent. She felt a pulse of something deep inside her chest, something she hadn't recognized in years. It wasn't loneliness. It was possibility. Her phone vibrated on the table. Ryan. A flurry of messages. Ryan, landed safe. Ryan, place is amazing. Ryan, I already feel lighter. Ryan, you'd love the view. Emma stared at the screen. Then she typed a single response. Good, find what you need. And then for the first time, she deleted his number. She took a slow breath and looked around the apartment again. The walls were bare, waiting. She imagined what they could hold, her art, her colors, her choices. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, fading quickly into the hum of city life. Emma leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. The floor beneath her was solid, her own. Somewhere in Colorado, Ryan was chasing clarity among the mountains. Here, in this quiet room filled with half-unpacked boxes and new beginnings, Emma realized she didn't need to go anywhere to find herself. She had simply needed to leave. Ryan called on the second day of his journey. Emma saw the call flash across her screen while she was setting up her small art easel near the window, the Seattle skyline stretching out in soft gray layers beyond the glass. She let it ring. He left a voicemail, cheerful, unbothered. Hey, Em, just wanted to let you know we got in fine. The mountains are incredible, like something out of a movie. You should see this view. I think this is exactly what I needed. I feel lighter already. She pressed delete before it finished. For the next few days, the apartment began to take shape. She bought a second-hand table from a thrift shop, painted it pale yellow, and set it under the window. She pinned her students' drawings on the wall and placed a small plant, a fiddle-leaf fig, by the corner, its leaves reaching eagerly toward the light. The air smelled of new paint and the faint sweetness of rain. It wasn't home yet, but it was hers. Leela came by with takeout one evening, balancing boxes of Thai food in her arms. Well, Mrs. Carter, or should I say MS Carter now, how's freedom treating you? Emma smiled, passing her a glass of wine. Strange, quiet, I keep waiting for something to break. Leela raised her glass. It already did, that's why you're free. They toasted, their laughter echoing in the small apartment. Outside, a siren wailed and faded into the night, as if the city itself exhaled with them. On the fourth day, the first cracks appeared. Not in Emma's life, but in Ryan's. It began with a video. Leela texted her a link with no context except, "You need to see this." When Emma opened it, the screen filled with the face of a blonde woman, flushed and furious, standing against a backdrop of pine trees and mountains. Chloe Reed. "I need everyone to know that Ryan Carter is a liar," Chloe said, her voice trembling with rage. "He told me his marriage was over. He said his wife supported this trip, that it was part of his healing process. Turns out he never told her the truth." The video cut to Chloe in a rustic lodge room, Ryan's new hiking boots visible behind her. "He told me we were both divorced. He said we were free to reconnect. Then I called to confirm the reservation and found out it was booked under Mr. and Mrs. Carter." Chloe turned the camera back to herself, tears in her eyes now. "So, Ryan, here's your closure." She held up his pristine, still tagged hiking boots and hurled them into a mountain stream. The camera followed the splash, the boots tumbling away. "Find yourself, Ben, or whatever your name is, and stay lost." The video ended with the sound of rushing water. Leela's next text came seconds later. "It's everywhere, Twitter, Facebook. Some hiker reposted it on Reddit. He's viral." Emma watched the screen go dark. She didn't laugh, though the irony was too perfect not to savor. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and whispered to the empty room, "Guess he found what he was looking for." That evening, the messages started. "Ryan, please call me." "Ryan, you saw that video, didn't you? It's not what it looks like." "Ryan, I can explain." "Ryan, why aren't you answering?" She read each one, then turned off her phone again. The satisfaction wasn't gloating, it was peace, clean and quiet. She made herself tea, sat by the window, and watched the city lights blink on one by one. Below her, life moved on. A man walking his dog, a couple laughing under an umbrella, the soft hiss of car tires on wet asphalt. The world didn't stop for anyone's heartbreak. It simply kept turning. 3 days later, Leela called between bursts of laughter. "Oh my God, Em, you're not going to believe this." "I've learned to believe most things lately," Emma said, sipping her tea. "Okay, but this is karma with choreography. Your husband X. Whatever came back early. 11 days early. Guess who picked him up from the airport?" Emma smiled. "Tom?" "Yep, he texted me the play-by-play. Apparently Ryan spent the whole ride ranting about ungrateful wives and psycho exes." "Sounds like enlightenment," Emma murmured. "Oh, it gets better," Leela said between snorts of laughter. "When they pulled up to your old house, he found it empty. Tom said he went pale, then red, then sat on the lawn yelling into his phone." Emma chuckled, covering her mouth. "He's lucky the neighbors didn't call the cops." "Oh, they didn't have to," Leela said. Mrs. Jensen filmed the whole thing. Her grandson uploaded it to TikTok. The caption says, "When your husband goes to find himself and discovers his wife already did." It's at like 500,000 views. Emma laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. "Mrs. Jensen's my new hero." She said it's her public service for women everywhere. They both dissolved into laughter until tears ran down their cheeks. Later that night, Emma received an email. The subject line read, "You can't just leave." The message was long, erratic, Ryan's words tumbling over each other in desperation. "I don't understand what you've done. I thought you supported me. I thought you wanted me to grow. How could you move out without telling me? How could you humiliate me like this?" He had the nerve to mention humiliation, she thought. "Please, Em, don't make this harder. Let's talk. We can fix this. You know I love you." She read the email twice, then hit delete. There was nothing left to fix. The next morning, the sky broke open into sunlight for the first time in weeks. The city shimmered, washed clean. Emma stood by her window, coffee in hand, and thought of the mountains where Ryan had gone to find himself, so far, so dramatic, so empty. He had gone looking for freedom. She had found it right here, in a small apartment that smelled of coffee and paint. Outside, the fig tree by her window swayed gently in the breeze. Its new leaves had unfurled overnight, bright, green, alive. Emma smiled. The mountain had crumbled, but she hadn't. She'd simply stepped away before it fell. The Monday after Ryan's meltdown arrived like any other Monday in Seattle, gray but gentle, the kind of morning that made you crave a second cup of coffee and a reason to believe in small new beginnings. Emma woke before her alarm, wrapped in the quiet of her apartment. The city below was still half asleep. The sound of a bus sighed through the street like an old friend. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the pressure of someone else's schedule. There was no coffee to make exactly right, no laundry to fold before another pair of careless hands scattered it again. Just her, her thoughts, and the stillness that had once terrified her, but now felt like an open sky. She made breakfast, eggs, slightly too runny, the way she liked them but never dared cook before. She ate by the window, barefoot, the plate balanced on her lap, rain tapping softly against the glass. Freedom, she realized, didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrived quietly in the way you could leave dishes in the sink without guilt. At school, her students noticed something. "Mrs. Carter, you cut your hair," one girl exclaimed, eyes wide. "It's Miss Thompson now," Emma corrected gently, smiling. "And yes, I did." The kids cheered as though a haircut were a revolution. Maybe in its own small way it was. Teaching felt lighter that day. The classroom, usually filled with the hum of chatter and crayons rolling off desks, seemed brighter, sharper. When one of the children asked if they could paint instead of doing worksheets, she hesitated for only a second before saying, "Why not?" By noon, their desks were covered in color, small masterpieces of hearts, houses, and skies that changed shades without logic. Emma walked between the rows, watching little hands at work, and felt something inside her settle. This was what she loved. Creation, expression, life not measured in productivity charts or emotional labor, but in color. That evening, she returned to her apartment to find a letter slipped under the door. The envelope was plain, her name scribbled in handwriting she recognized instantly. Ryan. She sat on the floor, the letter resting on her knee. For a full minute, she simply looked at it, tracing the letters with her thumb. Then she tore it open. "Emma, I don't know where to start. Everything's fallen apart." Chloe posted more videos, lies, exaggerations, and now everyone at work knows. My boss said they have to review my behavior. I'm suspended for now. I need to explain. You leaving the way you did, it destroyed me. You blindsided me. I'm not the villain here. You didn't even give me a chance to talk. After all we've been through, you just walked away? I still love you, Emma. You're my person. Please call me. We can start over. Ryan. She folded the letter slowly, deliberately, then dropped it into the trash. No anger, no tears, just clarity. The man who had accused her of not understanding him had finally run out of understanding to hide behind. On Wednesday, she visited Leela's art studio downtown. It was tucked above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and survival, its walls lined with canvases in every stage of creation. "Look at you," Leela said, grinning. "You're glowing." "It's probably the fluorescent lighting," Emma said. "It's peace," Leela corrected, handing her a brush. "Now paint something." "I haven't painted in years." "Then start badly," Leela said. "It's still starting," so she did. At first her hands hesitated, unsure of their old rhythm. The first strokes were messy, almost accidental, but the more she painted, the more her thoughts quieted. Hours slipped by unnoticed. When she finally stepped back, there was a storm of color before her, blue and ochre and white, chaotic but alive. Leela came to stand beside her. "That's not bad." Emma laughed softly. "It's not good either." "It's honest," Leela said. "That's what matters." Emma studied the painting again. She didn't know what it was yet, but she knew what it wasn't. It wasn't about Ryan, and that somehow made it beautiful. The following weekend, she took a walk through Pike Place Market. The air buzzed with music, seagulls, and the smell of salt and espresso. A man played the violin near the fish stall, his notes winding around the chatter of tourists and the crash of thrown salmon. Emma wandered between flower stalls, touching petals, smiling at the chaos. A vendor handed her a single sunflower. "For you," he said. She hesitated. "Why?" "You look like you needed one," he shrugged. Maybe she did. She carried it home, placing it in a chipped glass on her windowsill. It leaned slightly toward the light, stubborn and bright. That night, she cooked dinner, pasta with garlic and lemon, her grandmother's recipe. She poured herself a glass of wine, played a jazz record she hadn't listened to in years, and sat down to eat alone. The loneliness that once loomed now felt like a quiet companion. Her phone buzzed once more, another message from Ryan. I miss you, please answer. I can't sleep. She muted the conversation, turned her phone face down, and took another sip of wine. On the radio, a soft voice sang about beginnings that didn't need permission. Emma looked around her small apartment, the stacks of art supplies, the canvas drying by the wall, the sunflower reaching for a night sky it couldn't see, and smiled. It wasn't a grand rebirth. It wasn't fireworks or thunder. It was simpler than that. It was the first night she didn't think about him before falling asleep. And when morning came, she woke to the same quiet light that had started her week. The world outside hadn't changed. She had. By the end of the following week, Emma's life had begun to hum with quiet order. Her apartment smelled faintly of coffee and acrylic paint. The sunflower on her windowsill had started to wilt, but she left it there anyway. It seemed honest, in the way all beautiful things eventually softened. The city was beginning to warm into spring. Her students painted cherry blossoms in class, and Emma smiled at the irony, how something could bloom by letting go of winter. Then, on Thursday, the first message arrived from Ryan's mother. Patricia Carter, Emma, I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, but this has gone too far. You've humiliated my son. The entire neighborhood is gossiping. Whatever happened to being a good wife? Emma read it twice, then set her phone down, staring at the message as though it were written in another language. She didn't reply, but Patricia did. Patricia Carter, he made a mistake, fine, but airing his business online. You're cruel, he's broken, Emma. You've destroyed him. A small, almost bitter laugh escaped her. Destroyed him? The man who'd left her to find himself was now playing the victim, and his mother, as always, was his defense attorney. She typed a response, then deleted it. Instead, she whispered to the quiet room, he's just finally living in the mess he made. 2 days later, Leela arrived at her apartment with a newspaper folded under her arm and a look that said you need to sit down. Oh, Emma said. That's not your friendly let's gossip face. That's your brace yourself face. Leela unfolded the paper and pointed to a small photo in the corner of the local news section, Ryan, standing outside his company's office, looking disheveled, mid-argument with a reporter. The headline read, Tech Engineer Suspended After Viral Retreat Scandal. Emma blinked. Scandal? Apparently his company's PR team didn't love the optics of their employee being roasted online for lying to two women and expensing a spiritual getaway. Expensing it? Yup, Leela said, popping the P. $3,000 billed to his corporate card. They froze his account. He's suspended pending review. Emma leaned back in her chair, stunned not by the news but by how unsurprised she felt. He really thought he could turn adultery into a work retreat? Leela smirked. Men like Ryan think consequences are a myth until they show up with paperwork. That night, another email arrived, this time from Ryan himself. Emma, this has gotten out of control. People are calling me names online. My boss suspended me. Chloe's video has thousands of comments. I can't even go on LinkedIn without seeing jokes about finding yourself. You need to make a statement. Tell them this wasn't all my fault, please. She read it 3 times, amazed at the audacity. Not an apology, not accountability, just damage control. She closed the laptop without replying. Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Emma opened the door to find a courier holding a manila envelope. Delivery for MS, Emma Thompson, he said. Inside were official documents, a notice of potential legal claim from Ryan Carter, plaintiff. The reason, emotional distress and intentional humiliation. For a moment, she simply stared at it, disbelief rising like heat. Then she began to laugh deep, uncontrollable laughter that made her wipe tears from her eyes. When she finally called Leela, she could barely get the words out. He's suing me, she gasped. For what? For not being devastated enough, apparently. By the next morning, she'd forwarded the letter to her lawyer, a calm, middle-aged woman named Linda Greenwood, recommended by one of the teachers at school. Linda called her within the hour. First of all, she said, don't worry. This isn't going anywhere. Are you sure? Positive. The court doesn't award damages to grown men for embarrassing themselves. Emma smiled. That's comforting. Linda's tone softened. He's flailing, Emma. People like that don't know how to sit with consequences. Let him spin himself out. The fallout spread faster than either of them expected. Patricia called twice more, once leaving a voicemail that began with, "You heartless woman," and ended with a sobbing, "He's my baby." Emma blocked her number. Mutual friends started texting, too cautiously, as though approaching a wild animal. "Hey, just checking in. Crazy situation, huh?" She responded to none of them. Instead, she poured her energy into her classroom. Her students were preparing for their spring art show, the same one she'd tried to tell Ryan about months ago before he'd interrupted her with sports talk. Now, she stood in the middle of the gymnasium, surrounded by watercolor sons and finger-painted families. One of her students, a shy boy named Ethan, tugged her sleeve. "Miss Thompson," he whispered, "mine's not good enough." She knelt beside him. "What makes you say that?" "The sky's wrong, it's purple." Emma smiled. "Sometimes skies are purple, sometimes they're red or gold or green. The important thing is that you made it yours." He looked up, uncertain, then smiled shyly. "So it's okay to mess up. It's okay to be honest," she said. As the words left her mouth, she felt them land somewhere deeper than she expected. The following week, Linda called again. "Good news, the claim's been dropped." "That fast?" He realized he'd have to pay court fees if he lost. "Let's just say your ex is not in a financial position to gamble." Emma chuckled. "So it's over." Linda hesitated. "For him, maybe. For you? I'd say it's just beginning." That night, Emma celebrated alone with takeout sushi and a candle she'd been saving. She opened the window to let in the cool night air, the city lights winking like quiet encouragements. Her phone buzzed again, a notification from social media. Someone had tagged her name in a post. It was the video of Ryan's lawn meltdown, reposted by a local humor account. The caption read, "When you leave to find yourself and discover your wife found peace instead." The comments section was a mix of laughter and applause. Emma didn't engage, but she watched for a moment, not out of cruelty but closure. Then she shut her laptop, turned off her phone, and leaned back on the couch, breathing deeply. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and steady. She listened to it for a while, the rhythm steady, forgiving, alive. For the first time, she realized that the chaos surrounding Ryan no longer touched her. He was trapped in his own storm, and she was already standing in the calm after it. Spring ripened into early summer, and Seattle finally remembered how to be beautiful. Morning light poured through Emma's window in long, forgiving lines. Her fig tree was taller now, and the last traces of her old life, the boxes she once labeled mine, had been unpacked, absorbed into a home that no longer needed to define itself against what she'd lost. She woke earlier these days, not out of obligation but ease. Her routine was quieter now, coffee, soft jazz on the radio, a brief glance out the window at a sky that no longer felt heavy. The scars of the past months had faded into faint shapes beneath the skin of her days, but peace has a way of attracting its opposite. That Sunday morning, as she stood by the sink rinsing her mug, a knock came at the door, three sharp raps that didn't sound like a neighbor or delivery. Her stomach tightened before her mind caught up. She opened the door. Ryan stood there. He looked smaller somehow, his once neat hair unkempt, the confident posture replaced by a slouch that spoke of too many sleepless nights. The man who once lectured her about discipline and control now looked like someone struggling to remember what either word meant. "Emma," he said, voice brittle. "You look good." She crossed her arms. "What do you want, Ryan?" He sighed, shifting his weight like a teenager about to confess something half-true. "I just want to talk. Please, 10 minutes." She considered closing the door, then exhaled. "Fine, 10 minutes." He stepped inside, eyes scanning the apartment like it was a test he wasn't prepared for, the books stacked neatly by the window, the canvas leaning against the wall, the single chair with a soft throw draped over it. "This place," he murmured. "It's so you?" "It always was," she said quietly. "You just never noticed." He sat, awkwardly, on the edge of the couch. His fingers fidgeted with his phone. "I saw you blocked my number." "I did," he nodded, looking down. "Yeah, I deserved that." For a while neither spoke. The clock ticked. Somewhere down the street a car door slammed. Finally, he said, "Everything fell apart, Em." She didn't respond. He kept going, the words spilling out faster now, like he'd rehearsed them in the mirror. After that video went viral, my job gone. The firm said it was bad optics. My mom, she's furious, says I embarrassed the family. I'm back at her house. Emma raised an eyebrow. Your old room. His jaw tightened. Yeah, the silence that followed was suffocating. I've had a lot of time to think, he continued, about us, about what I did. Emma leaned back in her chair. You mean the trip you called a spiritual awakening? He winced. I was stupid, okay? I thought I was missing something, that I needed to find who I was, but I see it now. I already had everything, you, stability, love. I just wanted excitement, she finished for him. Wanted someone new to tell you how deep you are. He flinched like she'd struck him. That's not fair. It's honest, she said. He looked at her for a long time, eyes red and raw. I want to fix this, Em. I'll do counseling. I'll get help. I can't sleep knowing how badly I hurt you. Ryan, she said softly, you didn't just hurt me, you erased me. You took everything I did for you, the quiet things, the invisible things, and treated them like background noise. And when you wanted to find yourself, you didn't even think to look beside you. He dropped his gaze to the floor. I know. She studied him, really looked at him, the man who had once been the center of her orbit, now reduced to the outline of a lesson. His apology, though sincere in tone, carried the same pattern that had defined their marriage. He wanted her to rescue him from himself. Do you know what I found? Ryan, she asked. He looked up hopeful. What? Myself, without you. The words landed between them like the soft closing of a door. He stood slowly, running a hand through his hair. So that's it then? You're just done? I was done the moment I realized I felt peace in your absence. He nodded, defeated, and started toward the door. His hand lingered on the handle, trembling slightly. I really did love you, he whispered. I believe you, she said. You just never learned how. He left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, not like an ending, but like punctuation. For a long moment, Emma stood in the stillness he left behind. Then she turned toward her easel, where her latest painting waited, a skyline at sunrise, bold and imperfect. She picked up her brush and dipped it into gold. The first stroke cut across the canvas like light-splitting fog. Outside, the day moved on. She didn't know if Ryan would ever learn from his own chaos, or if he'd spend the rest of his life chasing versions of himself that didn't exist. But that wasn't her concern anymore. Her world had narrowed and deepened into something honest, not grand, but grounded. That evening, she called Layla. He came by, she said. Leela groaned. Oh no, what did you do? Nothing dramatic, Emma said. I just told him the truth. And what's that? That I'm not his home anymore. There was silence on the line, then the sound of Leela smiling. You really found your peace, huh? Emma looked at the painting again, gold light breaking through gray, and nodded. I didn't find it, she said softly. I built it. The weeks after Ryan's visit passed in a strange stillness. Not the suffocating silence of her old house, but a softer one like the hush between waves. Emma could breathe inside this quiet now. It no longer echoed with what she'd lost. Instead, it hummed with what she'd begun to gain. Her apartment had become a living thing, small vines curling along the window frame, new art drying on easels, piles of lesson plans scattered across the dining table. She'd stopped worrying about perfection. Sometimes the dishes stayed in the sink. Sometimes she worked late with music playing too loud. It felt like living, not performing. The Sunday routine, once an endless loop of invisible service, had transformed. Now Sundays were hers: yoga, grocery shopping at the market by the pier, maybe a phone call with her sister, or just a long walk through the city with no destination at all. Freedom had rhythm now. One morning, about a month after Ryan's visit, Emma received an email from her school principal. Subject: Art Department Expansion. Miss Thompson, your student's spring exhibit caught the attention of the district board. They'd like to fund a new art program for underprivileged schools. I'd like you to head it. She reread it twice, her heart skipping like a stone over water. Head it, not help with it, not assist under someone else. Lead it. It wasn't just a promotion, it was recognition. Proof that the parts of herself she'd spent years shrinking for someone else had always been worthy of space. She printed the email and taped it above her desk, right next to her favorite quote from one of her students. Art is what happens when you stop pretending you're fine. That weekend, she celebrated the way she celebrated everything now, quietly, meaningfully. Leela came over with her husband, Tom, and a bottle of champagne. To new beginnings, Leela toasted, and to Emma Thompson finally becoming the main character of her own life. Tom grinned. Couldn't have said it better. Also, your apartment smells a lot better than when we were here for Operation Liberation. Emma laughed, pouring glasses. That's because there's no man-scented chaos anymore. They clinked glasses, the laughter spilling easily between them. For the first time, Emma didn't feel like a guest in her own happiness. A week later, during an art supply run downtown, Emma ducked into a cafe near Pike Place to escape a drizzle. The place was warm, crowded with writers, freelancers, and dreamers who all seemed to know the language of solitude. She ordered a lavender latte, her favorite, and found a small corner seat. As she pulled out her sketchbook, someone approached the table. "Excuse me," a man's voice said gently. "Are you using this chair?" She looked up. He was around her age, maybe a few years older, tall, with kind eyes and a stack of books under one arm. He wore the look of someone who spent his life quietly noticing things most people missed. "No, go ahead," Emma said, smiling. "Thanks," he said, setting down his books. "I've been hunting for a seat since the rain started. It's like musical chairs in here." She glanced at the titles, Designing Joy Art Therapy for the Modern Classroom and a sketchbook with a worn leather cover. "You're an artist?" she asked. He smiled. "A designer mostly, but I volunteer at a youth art center, trying to teach kids that drawing outside the lines is the point." Her heart tugged. "I teach art too, second grade." "Ah," he said, his grin widening. "The fearless ones, the last age before self-doubt starts talking." Something in his tone, simple, sincere, made her chest feel unexpectedly light. They talked for half an hour about teaching, about how children saw the world before adults taught them to look away. He told her his name was Evan Turner, and that he ran a small design firm out of his apartment a few blocks from the school. Before he left, he said, "Maybe I'll drop by one of your classes sometime. It's nice to meet someone else who believes in color." When he walked out into the drizzle, Emma watched from the window as he disappeared into the flow of umbrellas. She wasn't thinking about fate or romance, just the simple warmth of a human connection that asked for nothing in return. Still, when she looked down, she found that she'd drawn his face in the corner of her sketchbook, half finished but alive. That evening, she received another email, this time from Linda, her lawyer. "Just wanted you to know that the divorce papers have been fully processed. The settlement's finalized. Everything's officially done. Congratulations, Emma, you're free in every sense of the word." Emma sat still for a long moment, the words soaking in. Officially done. She stood, walked to the window, and pressed her palm against the cool glass. Outside, the rain had stopped and the streetlights glowed against the slick pavement. She whispered the words aloud, not with sadness, but reverence. "Free." A few days later, she told her students about the new art program. Their cheers filled the classroom. Ethan, the same shy boy who once worried his sky was too purple, raised his hand. "Miss Thompson," he said, "does this mean more kids get to paint like us?" She smiled. "That's exactly what it means." "Aimed? Then you're like a superhero." Emma laughed. "Maybe just a teacher with good timing." But when the class returned to their projects, she lingered for a moment by the window, watching the playground fill with color and noise. A year ago, she'd been folding shirts for a man who never looked up. Now she was shaping futures, her own included. That night, Emma stopped by the same cafe again. She didn't expect to see Evan, but there he was hunched over his sketchbook, headphones in, brow furrowed in focus. When he noticed her, his face lit up. "You again, the art teacher who understands chaos. And you're the designer who preaches it," she said, smiling. "Guilty." He stood, motioning to the empty chair across from him. "Sit, I saved your spot this time." She hesitated for a heartbeat, then sat. And just like that, her life began to unfold in a new direction, not with fireworks, not with fate shouting from the rooftops, but with the quiet, steady rhythm of two people finding beauty in conversation. For the first time, Emma didn't need to find herself anymore. She had already arrived, finally, fully, in her own life. Summer stretched long and golden over Seattle, as if the universe itself was trying to apologize for all the years Emma had spent waiting for someone else's weather to change. Her mornings began with sunlight streaming through the window, warming the wood floor of her apartment. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, mingling with the faint scent of paint, her new favorite perfume. It had been 3 months since she'd seen Ryan at her door, 3 months since she'd closed that chapter for good. And somehow, everything after had been softer, not easier, not perfect, just hers. Her new art program had taken off faster than anyone expected. She split her time between her classroom and other schools in the district, guiding teachers on how to use creativity as a language for healing. The first day she walked into one of the outreach schools, a dim, underfunded building with peeling paint and a single shelf of dull supplies, she thought of her own classroom, her students, the life she'd built piece by piece. She rolled up her sleeves and smiled. "Let's make something beautiful out of what we've got," she said to the kids gathered around her. By the end of the week, those walls were alive with color, handprints, dreams, laughter. The principal called her a miracle worker. Emma just said, "It's amazing what happens when you give children a brush and permission to matter." Evan had become part of her days now, naturally, like a song you find yourself humming without meaning to. They didn't rush anything, no grand confessions, no borrowed timelines. Sometimes he joined her art sessions at the youth center, sketching alongside the students, his presence quiet but steady. Other times they just met for coffee or long evening walks through Gasworks Park, watching the city lights shimmer on the lake. He never tried to fix her, never asked to be her anchor. He simply stood beside her, unafraid of her space. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the water, Evan said, "You know, you remind me of one of my favorite quotes." "Oh," he smiled. And then she realized she was never asking for too much. She was simply asking the wrong person. Emma felt something loosen in her chest, not tears, not nostalgia, just release. "Who said that?" she asked. He shrugged. "Someone who understood timing, I guess." They sat in silence after that, not needing words. The air smelled like rain on warm pavement, and the city glowed around them, alive, imperfect, forgiving. Sometimes, late at night, she still thought of Ryan, not with anger, but with an almost detached gratitude. He had broken something inside her, yes, but in doing so, he'd revealed what was indestructible. She imagined him somewhere, still searching for himself in reflections that never quite matched. She didn't wish him harm. She just hoped he'd someday learn the lesson she had already mastered. Losing someone isn't the end of a story. Sometimes it's the beginning of your own. By fall, the art program had expanded across 3 districts. Emma's students painted murals about courage, forgiveness, and second chances. Her apartment walls were covered with their thank you notes, crooked hearts, bright suns, and words spelled imperfectly but sincerely. "Miss Thompson made me feel brave. Art is my safe place. She told me purple skies are real." Every note was a reminder of who she'd become. The woman who stayed, not in a broken marriage, not in someone else's story, but in her own life. One Sunday morning, exactly a year after Ryan had left for Colorado, Emma woke before sunrise. She brewed her coffee, wrapped herself in a soft blanket, and opened the balcony doors to the cool breeze. Below her, the city was waking, the distant sound of traffic, the hum of morning life. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for the pain that taught her peace, for the silence that made room for her voice, for the ending that became a door. She lifted her coffee in a small toast to the dawn, to all the women who learned to save themselves. Then, with a smile, she added, "And to all the purple skies we were told were wrong." Dear friends, thank you for walking this journey with Emma, through her heartbreak, her rediscovery, and her quiet triumph. Stories like hers are not just about love lost, but about self-worth found. May her courage remind you that no ending is final and no silence is empty if it brings you back to yourself. Wherever you are reading this, may your home be peaceful, your heart be kind, and your days filled with the people and passions that make you feel alive. With gratitude, wishing you health, happiness, and a family full of understanding and love.